Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B, on another episode of the Southbound Sports Show, the best Pittsburgh Steelers podcast that's out there. So tell your friends. Check out southboundsports.com and make sure you subscribe before we kick it off here. We were talking about Ben Roethlisberger. Of course, as soon as the show aired last week, Roethlisberger signs his extension. It's something that I wanted, and I've wanted for a long time, him to end up as a Steeler. I feel like we've talked about this countless times, but it's a rarity. And you're looking at one hand, you know most likely Tom Brady's going to end in New England. I don't think he would risk going to another system and ruining his career at this point. Why would you risk doing that to Roethlisberger when he's the only consistent player? I believe he's the only Super Bowl winning player left on the Steelers. And I know the roster could change. They could bring in some other guys that have won the Super Bowl with other teams, but he's the last remaining Steeler from those hard-hitting teams. So I love the deal. 3 years, almost guarantees he's going to finish out as a Steeler. Matt, what are your thoughts on that deal?
I really liked it. The 2-year extension was worth $68 million, and basically, he had 1 year left at 12, and now he has 3 at 80, and 67.5 of it's guaranteed. So it just goes to show you that when you're loyal to an organization, you have the longevity that Roethlisberger has. In the past, he's been willing to negotiate with them and restructure his deal to sign other players and free agents and teammates that he's rewarded, and I'm glad that he's going to be ending his career as a Steeler.
Yeah, and our big thing was, we heard a lot of hate comments about the extra money that they didn't have when Bell and Brown were negotiating. Then when they both left, everyone was saying, well, now it's just going to be wasted money because they're not going to be able to fill the cap. That's when you can reward players like this. Do a deal in the short term. I think they're paying a good bit of that up front because they know this year they're going to have the extra space. Why not reward the players that have helped your team and I mean, basically won 2 Super Bowls? So I love it. And on the opposite side of that, got a little bit of hate mail this week, Matt, in the mailbag on your comments last week on voluntary workouts. And I will say right off the bat, I don't remember the comments. I tried to do a scan through to see what exactly you said. But do you want to clear the air on this?
So as far as the voluntary programs, my initial point of looking at it was through the lens of high school and college, where you're trying to build team chemistry. So how do you build that? How do you develop and grow as a team? One of the things that you do is you spend time together. The more time that you spend together, whether you're lifting weights together, you're competing, it's going to build stronger bonds within the team, and it's going to make your team better. That's why there's so many programs that, like my high school, they had gone to where you slept in the high school, and for that week you didn't have, this was pre-cell phones, but even now, you don't have your phone with you during camp for the kids that are still playing. They're living at the school. They're not on their phones all the time. It's just you're with your teammates and you're hanging out, and I think it shows because consistently they're a great program within the area. When you look at the way that this plays out in the NFL, am I saying that Tom Brady needs to go to voluntary team workouts? No. He's a multi-Super Bowl, guaranteed first ballot Hall of Famer. At this point in his career, he's done enough that he doesn't have to show up for the voluntary camps because the offense is going to be what he wants it to be at this stage. He's calling the shots. But for a team like, let's say, Jacksonville, that hasn't been to a Super Bowl, that they have talent, but they haven't quite pieced it together, what do you got to do to get from there to the next step? I think back to Warren Sapp in those early 2000s Tampa Bay Buccaneers teams. When they started growing from the Yucks to the Bucks, there was a strong sense of doing stuff as a team. So everyone kind of did stuff together, and I think it translates to the field because you're spending this time together. It helps you to dig in when you're hitting those tougher moments in games, and I think it does pay off. The teams that work out and do stuff together, they typically end up performing better in the season.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here. I know you brought up the Jaguars. But Tom Coughlin was just fined, or at least reprimanded. I don't know if they actually fined him because of his statements regarding involuntary workouts, where he was basically inferring that they weren't voluntary at all. He wanted them there. So, I mean, you have a workout then that is basically required for a young team, and you know that the coach is going to be a hard ass because you don't have that type of veteran leadership. And I'll speak for myself in terms of high school. Like, no one wants to go to conditioning in the summer. Like, that's awful. I hated it. I'm glad I played baseball because then I didn't have to do that kind of stuff. So I understand your team building, but at some point when you're hitting like your 30s and later in your career, like, guys do not want to go to work out because they're back with their family. And actually, I've seen some better results. Like, I don't think T.O. was a guy that went to voluntary workouts, but he was always in magnificent shape. So that's not going to do anything for him. Sure, he was a locker room cancer or whatever the media tried to put out there. But was he in shape? Yes. He was always ready. He didn't get fat like some players. As soon as the season's over, they put on 30 pounds, and then they have to go to voluntary workouts, or they're never going to get in game shape. So I think it's a mixed bag. I'm not for them. I kind of hate them.
How many Super Bowls did T.O. win? Sure, he had the physique for it, but
Matt, he can't throw the ball to himself. Did you see his performance in that Eagles Super Bowl?
But I will say that it does matter because as someone who coaches quarterbacks, if you're calling a hitch route or you're calling a slant, you could have 10 different receivers running it 10 different ways. And just because you personally are in the best shape of your life doesn't necessarily mean that chemistry is there with your quarterback or with your wide receiver or whoever those players are. Being together, working through some of that stuff, that's what's going to make things so much better. That's what makes that continuity where you're running, where you know where your teammates are going to be. It helps because then they know where they have to throw the ball so that their teammate can make a play.
I just feel like T.O. got Garcia and McNabbed. You can only get so far with your quarterbacks not able to take that next step. He played on a broken foot. He had awesome stats that year. He should have did the Ocho Cinco and made a play to go to New England. I mean, then he would have been close. Could you imagine if he worked it out, kind of like, you know, how LeBron teams up with his buddies? If Ocho Cinco and T.O. decided to go to the New England the year that they got Randy Moss, that would have been an unstoppable team. They would have went undefeated. That's what they were missing on their team, T.O.
Easy to say in hindsight.
All right, let's get into the Steelers NFL draft now. I'm going to kick it off by saying I give him an A+. And I'm going above and beyond with that. I know some people are going to have their own opinions, but right off the bat, they actually attacked their needs. Last year, I didn't think they did. I know you can't really pin the missing the playoffs last year on the draft not addressing their needs because it was clear there were locker room issues. But this year, you went out there, you got some speed at linebacker, Devin Bush. We talked about some of his negatives last week. Tough to shed blocks. Sometimes he gets pinned because of his size on the wrong side of the hole. Pretty good in coverage. He played man in college. He's a pretty good blitzer. And he has great closing speed. So all around, you're going to have a guy that fits into the Steelers mold. They actually traded up to him, which I was shocked. And I want to pin this on you, Matt, right off the bat. Do you think the Bengals would have taken him had the Steelers not traded up?
Well, had the Steelers not traded up, I think he definitely would have been gone by the time they got there. So I don't know who specifically would have taken him, but somebody definitely would have. I think Cincinnati would have with losing Burfitt. I think that definitely could have been a landing spot for him, and then he would have been a pain in the ass for more years, playing him twice a year. I would have much rather they made the move, they jumped up, they had the need. And then I also think on the flip side, they're holding Shazir's contract again and putting him on the PUP list. And as he continues to rehab, there's an outside glimmer that he could potentially make a full comeback. And if he does, I mean, adding him just makes that linebacker depth that much more meaningful.
Yeah, and that's where you have the advantage of building up on defense. We've talked about it. What is the transition going to be like? Now you're in the twilight years of Ben Roethlisberger. It really doesn't matter what you put around him. Look at what happened with Peyton Manning at the Broncos. You can't tell me Peyton Manning did anything to win that Super Bowl. How did the Broncos win it? With defense. So that's how you win a Super Bowl in the twilight years of your star quarterback. Look at how the Patriots did it this year. That game was what? 6-9 or something? It was like a one-score game. Almost the entire game. It wasn't a high-scoring offensive game. But you have to have a quarterback that can win in a shootout, which I confidently believe in Ben Roethlisberger. Go ahead and build the defense. Build the defense back up, because that's what got Roethlisberger the Super Bowls in the first place. So I'm glad they traded up. It's the first time they've traded up
since Polamalu.
Since Polamalu, which is what? How many years ago? 16 years ago? 17? I don't even know what year he came out. But that's a long time ago to trade up. They finally made their move, so they had to be high on Devin Bush. I'm surprised he lasted that long. And I got to give a little bit of props to TJ Hawkinson, the tight end that a lot of Pittsburgh media were putting out there as a potential for the Steelers. I didn't think he lasted till 20. He didn't even last till 10. So even if the Steelers wanted to trade up for him, let's say they had a deal with the Broncos to trade up no matter who they had. Like, let's say if those were his two picks, that's why it leaked in the Pittsburgh media that they were looking at Hawkinson and Devin Bush. We don't even know. But I think it worked out for the Steelers, so hopefully that wasn't their plan, either or. But the Lions, man, if you want to see the opposite side of a draft, they drafted two basically high tight ends with the guy from Georgia and then TJ Hawkinson from Iowa in the first round. Why? Why are you doing that? You have a team that, why aren't you building your defense and trying to do the same thing with Matt Stafford? I mean, you've given the guy weapons in his career. He had Megatron. What did he do with him? Nothing. At some point, you have to build your defense up. So, Steelers fans, feel lucky. I also liked the Snell pick at running back. I didn't think that they needed a running back, but hey, build the depth because you're running back by committee now. That's how I feel the team's going to go. I was looking at some of the stats, and Samuel's got a good bit of touches last year. Why not? Why not add another pure running back that's versatile into the mix? I know you were high on that pick. Matt, what do you think about the mid-round picks?
I kind of like the direction that they did. I didn't feel like they were reaching for players. Like at times, I think everyone says, "Oh, their secondary sucks. Oh, they have to pick for this player, that player." I think with the stuff that they've already done, I think they had a quiet free agency where they've signed some good talent. So yeah, Brown's gone, and they brought Moncrief in. So I think there's not necessarily a one-for-one, but you're getting outside deep threat for an outside deep threat. You have Bell gone. They picked Snell up. That I think, if you watched the Penn State bowl game, which ironically was on close to the draft, they replayed that on ESPN. That I was watching and I thought, boy, he would be a great pickup for Pittsburgh. Great burst, athleticism. That I thought, boy, he would just fit right in that similar type of role that Le'Veon Bell was in. And lo and behold, they picked him up late, and I thought that was going to be a great pick because inevitably Connor's the starter going in. But at some point, he has to prove that he can play a full schedule. And at some point, he always ends up getting banged up and missing some time, that it's good to have that depth. So I think Snell doesn't have to push for a lot of carries in the early part of the year. But I think if he does if something were to happen to Connor, your hamstring, things like that, ankle, that he can step in and take a lot of carries. I think that's a positive. I like that they got a bigger corner. That he was 6'2". I kind of like that they picked up some size. I think the thing that's going to help their defense the most, and what most people have to understand, is Pittsburgh's not a team that is really far removed from being competitive. I think losing the Toxic Twins was adding by subtracting, so that they're gone. Now you pick up Bush, that's going to help with your pass rush, that you get a little bit more pressure on the quarterback, and now it's not putting so much pressure on the secondary. You could see the defense completely shifting into a positive direction. So I think that they definitely addressed their needs, and it's going to be something that's going to help them in the long run because they get more pressure on the quarterback. They're able to sustain some drives, and Ben doesn't have to force throws to try to appease the egos. I think you could be looking at a completely different team, and I think if I was the Rooneys, I'd be telling people a lot of people are going to lose their jobs if we get the same kind of nonsense this year that we had last year.
Yeah, and I'm going down through trying to look at just some other grades that people have given the draft. I mean, you trade up for Bush. I know a lot of people gave that a negative mark just because of they gave up like 3 draft picks. But at this point, you already had a good number of picks. What is a few more that you're going to put on there? Like at that point, if you're grading just based on other potential picks that you could have made, I'm looking right at what they got. You got a great linebacker that's impact. I'm familiar with the cornerback Langford that you mentioned, Matt, because he played at Michigan State. So I'm giving Bush an A. I think, or no, not Langford, Lane, Justin Lane. So Lane on the other side, I was thinking their wide receiver. He is big, but he's a little bit raw. I did think that they could have got a better cover guy based on some of the other guys that were still out there. But at this point, you went size last year. It seems to be working out. You have Hayden and some other guys. Their contracts are going to be up soon. Why not go with the bigger guys that can run with like tight ends and then put them in the nickel? Like, I don't think that's a bad pick at all because you're having some guys that are coming in with some versatility. You got Edmonds last year that can play strong safety. Now you're getting Lane with size. Go ahead and put that up there. A lot of people gave that negative marks. I don't know why anyone would give the Snell pick anything other than an A or an A plus, because that's a hell of a move. Like you said, fits into the system. He's athletic. Why not? You can't count on Connor. Connor had a ton of carries. The way the Steelers run the offense, it's better to have a running back by committee. Now, the Deontay Johnson, the 3rd round wide receiver, I think that's going to be one that is a little bit hit or miss. His size and the fact that he played, I think he played wire in the MAC.
Yep.
So they're going for, I saw a lot of comparisons to Antonio Brown, but just because you draft a player out of there, it doesn't mean he's going to be exactly like someone else from there. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger played at Miami, Ohio. You don't see the Steelers drafting every Miami, Ohio quarterback. That would be insane. So I saw a lot of high marks on him. I'm a little bit lower. I'd give that probably a B or a C, just due to the fact that it's a mid-round pick. You can take projects at that pick. Steelers have been pretty good drafting wide receivers around that and turning them into serviceable players. So I'm not too worried about that. I think that's where the draft really shines. Another project they took, Zach Gentry. I wouldn't be a Michigan man if I didn't mention that he had a problem with drops in some of his routes. Now, he is raw. He came in from Arizona as a quarterback. He was the first quarterback that Coach Harbaugh signed when he came from the NFL. And he took the tight end position because he's 6'7". Great target. He's made some great catches in his career. Just needs to be consistent. And to be honest, he has a lot of upside. Steelers drafted him at the upside. Now, he did struggle at the combine, but of course at Michigan's Pro Day, He turned that all around. I think he ran like a 4.6 40, which isn't blazing fast for a tight end, but a tight end at that size at 6'7", that's some pretty good wheels. I think his first combine was like, a 4.9 or something like that. It was something much slower. So we'll see what we get. Definitely going to be a project there, but I'm happy for him. He came out early, got drafted by the Steelers, and I think it's a perfect fit because they can use another target. Then you start to get into your defensive help with Sutton Smith, outside linebacker, Isaiah Buggs, defensive tackle or defensive end from Alabama, which he had some problems. But if you're playing at Alabama, you know you have high upside. Ulysses Gilbert, inside linebacker.
Crazy stat for Saban. I saw he has more players drafted than losses.
Really?
In the SEC, I think, since he's been there. He has like 27 players drafted and 21 losses. Like, it's something insane.
Well, that's probably... I think he has to have more than that. Because I did notice one thing when they were talking about the draft. They kept talking about how Alabama had an amazing 10-pick year. But I know, like 2 years ago, Harbaugh had 11 picks, and ESPN didn't talk about that at all. So 10 picks, not impressive. I'm sure you do it a couple years in a row, but whenever you're getting the best talent, I saw, was it 24/7? They tried to do a poll on which coach develops the best talent, and they just took all like their top 247 players and put them on a list, and then went through and marked them as a +1 if they got drafted, and like a -1 or something. Basically, that's me boiling it down to the basic of math. If you didn't get drafted, but of course, if Alabama's getting not just the top 247, they're not taking player 247 and turning him into a pick. They're taking players 1, 9, 11, 12, and 15. So of course they're going to get picked every year. You're getting like top 30 talent. It's not really developing players. And I think that's what you see in the NFL with ESPN did make a case about LSU players actually performing better in the NFL. That was like on day 3. I think it was Saturday when they had someone trying to make that point because their draft show was ridiculous. Did you watch it? Did you watch ESPN or did you watch someone else?
Well, I floated back and forth between all 3 channels, between NFL Network, ESPN, and ABC. And to be honest, I was kind of disappointed because one of the things that I've always liked with the draft, especially with the first round pick and the early day 2 picks, was getting that big highlight reel of what the team was possibly getting. And I felt like it kind of almost turned into more of a Hollywood production of the fanfare of who their family is and all this other like backstory stuff. I just wanted to see some of the tape of what made the team want to take them with that pick.
Yeah, I got into this the third day, and by that time they were showing Zion coverage. They had a whole segment on Mel Kiper because I was actually outside putting together a swing set. So I thought, you know what, I'll stream this and watch it a little bit while I'm working because what's the big deal? At least it gives me something to listen to. And it was the most ridiculous thing. They were talking about Mel Kiper's hair. They kept congratulating each other, like patting each other on the back. Like, hey, we're doing a great job here. It's hard to talk about players for 3 days in a row. Ha, 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 ha. And then they would be like complimenting the stats guys for being like, yeah, it was a great stat. You told us that he played 51 games. Killer. Like, great job, Raul, back in headquarters. It was like the most over-the-top coverage and just congratulating themselves on their coverage. I was like weird to watch. And at this point, I wish the NFL would just start, and maybe they did and I couldn't find it. I wish they would just start streaming it for free on like the NFL app. Because why not? It's the NFL's package. Why let ESPN promote themselves? It's just strange. I think you would get that coverage. The first day of the draft, what did we get? We got a Taylor Swift promo. We had Lee Corso just leave. I have no idea where he went. After he put on the Dwayne Haskins headset and left. No idea. So it's weird. We're going to get into the other teams here. We'll take a little break and do some high tempo, but I just want to hit on the last couple Steelers picks. I think I got Ulysses Gilbert, and these defensive players are just, they picked them late. That's Smith, Buggs, and Gilbert. They picked them for depth and hopefully to contribute on the special team side of things. So I really can't rate them. I know that you could say, oh, they could have got this player, that player. I mean, Buggs, he played at Alabama. You know, he played against top competition. Sure, he had some issues, but could that be fixed in the NFL? Oh, 100%. So we'll see. I don't think that you're rating these players just based on what they're going to get. Hopefully they can get in some players. I mean, you take Gilbert, maybe he can be a special teams player off the bat. Then maybe he can come in and spell Devin Bush. You're getting two players to at least come in and compete with each other so that Devin Bush isn't coming in confident, thinking that he's handed the position. So I love that pick. And then last you had, I think it was the last one. I don't know if I wrote these down in order. Derwin Gray, and he is a tackle, and it's really hard. I think offensive line is the hardest position group to predict, so I don't mind taking another one. Unless you have a surefire pick like Joe Thomas or someone down the line that you can get high in the draft, which the Steelers almost never do, have a draft pick that high. You got to take guys like this, and hopefully they work into position players that you can then either build into starters or trade, have them as reserves, see how long they can stick. So that's the end of their draft. I really liked the upper mid rounds, and I'm not really familiar with all the players in the later rounds, but I do like the positions that they grabbed. You have linebacker, D-line, linebacker, cornerback, and another linebacker. So you're getting the positions of need. And last year I felt like they didn't go that. They went more offense with like quarterback, wide receiver, running back. You had the strong safety and some other picks, but you were leaving gaps. This year they're filling them. So with that, I give it an A+. Do you have anything else you want to hit on the Steelers draft before we start to shift in, Matt?
No, I just think in general they did a really good job. I was pleased that they didn't reach for that many people, and with some of the riskier picks later in the draft, you get a lot of you can find talent late rounds and undrafted. So I think that they addressed exactly what they needed. One of the things you were saying about 247 that I was looking at was they put out a stat too of the 3-star guys. They looked at the rankings of players that got drafted, and they talked about there were more 3-stars that ended up being drafted compared to 5-stars. But what they didn't leave out was that you're going to end up with more athletes are going to be rated as 3-stars compared to 5-stars. So the probability of being a 5-star and then moving on to the NFL, you're already like a very small percentage going to get 5-stars, and then to be able to go from 5-star college to 5-star drafted, that's an even smaller percentage. So kind of a misleading statistic.
Yeah, and 100% for those that don't follow recruiting, Matt's right. Normally 5-stars are only the top 25 or 30 players or so. So regardless of position, if you're in that top 30 group, like I said, Alabama can land 4 or 5 5-stars. And of course, they're all going to get drafted, boosting Nick Saban's numbers. Then the 4-stars are the next group down, and there's like probably 75 of them. I could be wrong, but I think it goes to like the top 100, maybe more. And then after that, then the rest of the top players are usually all 3-stars. So it kind of breaks down based on position. So like you might have a year where it's very heavy for D-line. So like there might be like 10 D linemen that are ranked 4 or 5 stars, and then there's a huge drop off. Other years it might be quarterbacks. It just varies. But yeah, normally they only rate like the top 20 or 30 players in their overall rankings as 5-stars. And there are a ton more 3-stars, and 3-stars make up most of the college rosters. So I wish they could do it by percentage, but I think that they also, Matt, when they make those stats, because I was looking at them, I think they were kind of padding them so that they didn't look like their evaluations were bad. Because 24/7 is one of the leaders in coming up with 5-star stats. So they couldn't make it seem like their 5-star rankings were bad. Otherwise, who's going to pay attention to them? So I feel like they're going to do it very, very sneaky. They're going to sneak in the numbers that they want you to see. But what do I know? Let's get in the high tempo. What do you got for us this week? We'll break up the NFL draft with it.
Well, I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with the draft, but there were 144 underclassmen who declared pro. And of the 144 that decided to go pro, 49 of them ended up not getting drafted. And I know we've talked about this in the past, but for the potential college athletes out there, that you want to make sure that you have solid information before making that decision, because I hate to see these players that declare early and they're giving up opportunities to continue their education thinking that they're a lock to be drafted, and then to find out that they go through the draft process and to not be drafted, and now you're not even guaranteed a unrestricted free, or a free agent contract or a walk-on tryout. You're really put in a bad place, because with football, they can't go back to their college teams now that the draft went through, because they picked up representation and things like that. So I think that hurts them. And for those athletes, I feel for them, because they make that decision thinking that they're going to try to declare and better their families, and it ends up coming back to bite them, because you don't get drafted, and now you're stuck with nowhere else to go.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. I don't think that a lot of people realize that NFL is different than the NBA. I saw a couple of people mention that today, of all days, NC State put out a graphic that kind of went viral of all their quarterbacks in the NFL with like a hashtag NFLU or something like that. And a lot of people were coming on talking about the Russell Wilson inclusion, because Russell Wilson played at NC State. He was a dual athlete, played baseball and football. The football coach said, hey, we don't want you to play baseball anymore, or you're not going to be on the team. And he said, well, then I'm going to grad transfer to Wisconsin. I don't think he played baseball there, so it was a little bit murky. I don't remember exactly, but of course he gets drafted by the NFL after his Wisconsin year. And I saw a lot of misinformation being spread around about Russell Wilson doesn't count. He didn't even get invited to the NFL draft after or NFL combine after his junior year, and all of this stuff. And I don't think that people realize it's not like the NBA. You can't go to the combine and then decide to come back to college. Once you declare, that's it. You declare, normally athletes declare in what, January, before signing day? Because signing day is right there. So if you don't declare, coach could push you out or whatever. I know they'd kind of do it with the new NBA rules. The new NBA rule and college basketball rule is if you go to the draft, you can go through the whole draft as long as you're with an NBA approved agent or NCAA approved agent. I don't know who picks the agent. And if you don't get drafted, you can come back to your team if they have a spot for you. So let's say signing day for basketball rolls around and your school's like, okay, well, so-and-so flipped to someone else on the last day. We have an open Scully. We're going to fill it with a walk-on, but instead let's wait and see if so-and-so will come back. And so then the NBA draft, now if they do get that guy and there's no more spots, then I don't know what happens. Like what, you're just stuck? You have to try to go play overseas? Hope the NBA D-League, someone gives you a shot? In the NFL, it's totally different. Like Matt said, when you declare, that's it. You have to go all out, and if you don't get drafted, you're stranded. It's not like the NBA where you still have that really slim hope of a lifeline, because you don't. And I'm going to get into that in a sec here with some hypotheticals. I want to get your thoughts, Coach, on some of the players coming out, but it's a real eye-opener. These kids are kind of gambling where, hey, I'm going to come out early. I have so-and-so in my ear, just like I complained about with the NBA. You get some guy in your ear telling you that you're going to go pro. You go to the draft thinking it's 7 rounds. Then you don't get drafted. if you don't get signed, then you're out of luck. So we'll get into that. Let's break it up a little bit, though, with some high tempo. I did have some college stats with, I guess we'll keep a little bit of the NFL draft stuff. I have some other news, but we'll save it for when we get to the other playoffs. But we have Nebraska broke their draft streak in terms of the longest draft streaks. You have USC and Michigan, I believe, are tied at like 80-something years now. It might even be 80. Then they have Michigan State, who's 1 year behind them. Then it was, I want to say Florida, and then Nebraska. Is that the years? I did have the entire thing pulled up, but Nebraska, how can you blow it? Michigan didn't even blow it when they had Brady Hoke. So you have Brady Hoke and Rich Rod, two awful coaches back to back. Nebraska gets Mike Riley. I have the dates here. Michigan, USC go all the way back to 1939. This is from The Athletic, which is a newspaper I guess you can subscribe to online. So that would be, 80 years now? Something similar like that. And then you have Michigan State, 1941, which would be 2 years less than that, so 78. Then Florida, a huge gap. They didn't have their first draft pick in their streak until 1952. And then Nebraska was 1963. So big gaps. I think Virginia Tech, did they lose theirs? There were a couple streaks that ended. I know.
So you have Brady Hoke and Rich Rod, two.
Nebraska was the big one. Then I think they had, who was the other one? Virginia Tech lost theirs. Did Duke? There were some ACC schools that didn't have players drafted. And then the other team, I guess you could include Notre Dame, tries to say that they have the longest streak, but they didn't have a player drafted in 1977. They had a guy picked up in the supplemental draft, and to me that doesn't count because I don't even know what the supplemental draft is. So that's my extra high tempo. I'll see if I had some other stuff down. Some baseball stuff going on, but it's still early, so not really paying attention with that with the other playoffs going on. Let's get into the NFL draft overall review, and I want to get your thoughts on players skipping their bowl games, Matt. So Michigan had a guy, Karan Higdon, was a running back. He skipped the bowl game against Florida. He was a team captain, by the way. Skipped it to work out for the draft. Went to the Senior Bowl instead and didn't get drafted. What are your thoughts? Do you think there's a relation to that?
I think there is a little bit. And I saw one of the interviews that Pittsburgh, when they were talking about drafting Benny Snell, they said one of the things that they liked was that he didn't opt out of the bowl game because playing Penn State and not playing in a major bowl, they could have had every opportunity to, or not playing in one of the playoff games. They didn't. They could have just folded it in and just said, I'm going to worry about my draft stock. But because he didn't do that, that really caught the eye of the front office people. So I think it does help them. You run the risk of injuring yourself in these bowl games, but I do think that in a lot of ways it's a good showing to play in those games and to be with your teammates and things like that.
Yeah, on the other hand, you have Bosa, who quit on his team in the middle of the year. I knew there was an injury, but he could have came back. Didn't. Was taken number 2 overall, I believe, to the 49ers. So you have opposite sides, but I think at this point, if you were going to sit out the bowl game, you have to have a first-round grade.
But I think that's an outlier. Like McCaffrey could get away with it. Bosa could get away with it because they've had that family lineage. If Tom Brady's kid comes up through and they decides he's not going to play in the bowl game, realistically, some team's going to take a stab at him. Like, he's going to get drafted just because his dad's Tom Brady. Hell, Chris Sims got drafted because his dad was Phil Sims. He did nothing in the league. So, I mean, there's something to be said about if your dad has done something in the league, they're going to take a chance on that, on those genetics that you're going to carry. You're going to continue to do well as well. So I mean, between both of those guys, you see that. If Nick Bosa doesn't have a brother that's already in the NFL, does he get drafted number 2 overall? Being devil's advocate,
I honestly don't know. Did you hear his dad talk? Dude, steroids must have wrecked his brain. I don't even know how they aired that at the draft. I could barely understand him. So you have that on one hand, and his brother, yeah, great. Look at T.J. Watt. If J.J. Watt wasn't so great, do you think he would have been a first-round pick by the Steelers?
I would say probably not.
I don't think so either. So you have guys just like that. I honestly think that T.J. Watt was very similar to Chase Winovich, who went in the 3rd round to New England.
New England.
Yeah, great measurables at the NFL Combine. I think we had talked about it that Winovich had like the quickest shuttle time of any of the D linemen and some of the other measurables. Very TJ Watt like. And you have him drop all the way to the 3rd round, and I think it's a perfect fit for him. And I hate to just keep putting out a couple Michigan guys, but that's just what I noticed right off the bat in the draft is, of course, New England gets a hard-working guy like that. Of course, they find him in the 3rd round when he very easily could have been snatched up by someone else in the 2nd round. Because that's what New England does. Watch, he'll be in the league for like 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised if he was one of the top performers out of all the D linemen that were drafted this year. But we'll see. That's the beauty of the NFL draft. We honestly don't know. And the other thing, Matt, that I wanted to ask you from a coaching perspective, do you think some coaches like Dabo Swinney should be allowed to parade on national television? How is that not a recruiting violation?
Because he's a winner. Winners get to do what they want.
Bro, if Harbaugh did that, everyone would just be asking him when he coming back to the NFL, or they would have been like, oh, this proves it. He's coming back to the NFL. He's at the draft. He could have been hanging out with John Harbaugh, wearing all Ravens gear, and they would have thought for some reason that he was going to be their new assistant coach. But Dabo's allowed to have all these players drafted. Some of them performance-enhancing drugs. I did hear at ESPN mention that, so I was shocked that they mentioned that at the draft.
Well, of course they're going to throw. Of course they would throw that because Clemson isn't in the SEC. Had Clemson joined the SEC, it would have just been swept right under the rug.
What was the one guy that was like very uncomfortable, where they went into his life story? That he was like fighting someone that fought his sister. It was like the most uncomfortable 10 minutes of TV I might have ever watched. I don't remember the player. That's how inconsequential their little PSA that they put out there was. But if you're watching the draft and they go into someone's personal history and they're trying to convince you in the most politically correct way, it was almost like he was reading a press release. Like you see here in 1999, the player was outside his house. Like that's what he was reading for like 10 minutes straight. And they showed the clip of 2 people fighting and it was like cell phone footage. And I was so shocked that they just kept going back to it, trying to explain why this player fell in the draft. And I was just like baffled. Why is this part of the draft?
Now that you say that, I do remember them talking about that because for as long as they continued to talk about it, it was like...
It was uncomfortable.
I thought that's really inappropriate because this is supposed to be a night where like you're celebrating these players making a milestone of that very few people get to hear their name called, and you're like ruining this draft memory by like dragging that information, like dragging that story.
Matt, did they do it for other players? Did they show LeGarrette Blount punch that player 20 times? Did they keep just showing that highlight for 20 minutes? No. Who's the player? Who's the guy from the Bengals that punched that chick?
Mixon.
Yeah, Mixon. Did they show his clip for 20 minutes and talk about why he fell in the draft? That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. Heck, I don't even remember them playing the Laramie Tunsil thing, the video, until like later in the draft They definitely didn't mention it right when it happened. That was all over Twitter and other things whenever he was hitting that bong. There was no way they were going to show that during the draft, but this year they decided to make a go of it. And then the weirdest way possible. Like, I could see mentioning it, showing the video, okay, let's move on. But they just keep trying to, it was almost like they were trying to convince you that it was okay he was in the NFL. So I don't know if NFL pushed that out, and it was like their way of saying, okay, this guy's not a woman beater, because look at this video. Here's why. I don't know, it was just awkward.
Like they're trying to preemptively say, hey, we know this video's out here.
And I feel like no one would even have found that. Because,
someone definitely.
Oh, you would have found it, but it wouldn't have been to the mainstream. Like, it would never have got trending. He wasn't the number one pick. Most of his stuff, if you search in Google, that's not going to be on the first page because he's played college ball since then. It's not like there's someone out there with a vendetta against him that keeps writing an article at like the local paper about it. It was just weird. That's my last thought for the NFL draft. Do you have anything else you want to add before we get into some other playoff talk?
I'm curious to see, and I know that like it takes time to see who goes where, but I am curious to see how number one, Gary plays out, getting drafted from Michigan, going up to Green Bay. Curious to see how that played out because I think that was a pretty good fit for them, and also really bizarre with the Raiders taking Farrell at 4. And then going running back at 24, and then safety at 27. Like, either they know something that the rest of the world doesn't, or just craziness.
It's crazy. I don't know what they're doing. It's almost like Gruden has no idea. He's really embarrassing me because I was so high on him on the show early on. But please, Gruden, prove me right. Just do something. I have no idea what you're doing, but you're turning into the Lions out there. It's almost like Al Davis is still here. But with the Gary one, they announced that he was a linebacker. So I was very shocked that you would take a highly rated defensive end and then take him with the 12th pick if you're going to try to make him into a linebacker project. And I hate talking about Michigan guys the entire time. I was surprised that Miles Sanders got drafted so high. Great measurables out of high school to go to Penn State. You're behind Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley comes into the NFL, destroys it, has an awesome year. Miles Sanders did not do well at Penn State, at least to that high expectation. Penn State didn't have a great year as they had with Barkley and in the past with under Franklin. They drafted him in the second, I believe. So there were a couple things like that I saw out there. The Rams took David Long, a Michigan cornerback, another Big Ten guy. And the only mark that I saw that the NFL put out, I forget who it was. I think it was Darrell Revis, actually said that he saw the scouting report on Long. And the only thing that the NFL marked as a negative was that he was a little bit too short. So Revis said that he's definitely going to be a guy to watch and cover. I think Pro Football Focus had him as the number one coverage defensive back. So for the Rams to get him in a later round, the second or third, that's a great steal to me. Same with Paris Campbell. I believe he fell from Ohio State around the same position. I think he went to the Colts. I could be wrong on that. But he has blazing speed. That's not the kind of guy you want running around the AFC in the second or third round because he's been very, very versatile. I know Ohio State played him a lot at like their H-back type position or like they're out of the backfield running back type deal where he's catching the ball, but very fast. So those are some of the Big Ten guys that surprised me other than Winovich that I already mentioned earlier that you're getting in the middle rounds because of all the SEC hype like you mentioned, Matt. Why not? How are these not going to be steals? We'll see. That's just my Big Ten wrap-up. Did you have anything else?
Just surprised that Rosen ended up getting traded to Miami. I know that Kingsbury was really high on Murray, and I think I don't know how accurate it is to try to compare him to Mahomes. They were trying to force some similarities. I'm curious to see how that ends up playing out. I definitely think Kingsbury is going to try to use some of those air raid concepts with Murray, but I don't know that Arizona added enough weapons to really try to help him out offensively.
Matt, that draft was awful. You go quarterback that's small and undersized. They brought him onto the stage, and I put it on our Instagram. You can follow us at Southbound Sports on Instagram. He was shorter than the woman reporter. Go to our Instagram and check out that photo. How can you say that that's going to be a guy that's durable and can see over his line? He couldn't even see over the reporter. Shocked that they would just take receivers after him. I have no idea. And then, you didn't get a guy like Paris Campbell. You let him fall to the Colts, which I looked up. That is where he is. Could you imagine a blazing fast guy like that in that offense with Murray? He has experience out of the backfield. But nope. Kingsbury doesn't need that because Kingsbury hasn't had a winning season in 4 years. So, make it 5. That's my Kingsbury motto. Why not make it 5 losing seasons in a row? He hasn't had a good season since he lost all of Mike Leach's players. Let that sink in. But the Cardinals are letting him run the franchise. Get out of here. We're getting late. I want to get into some of the NHL stuff, though. So I was worried after Sunday's game. Carolina, they come back, beat the Caps in 7. It went to overtime. It was like the perfect storm. That's exactly what I wanted for the Pens.
The perfect hurricane, if you will.
Yeah, the perfect hurricane for the Pens in the second round. If only the Pens had made it. That's exactly what I wanted in that first round. Let the Hurricanes and the Caps beat each other up. But then in overtime, my God, is the NHL going to be more one-sided? And I know this might sound, well, you're a Pens fan, so you're going to be against the Caps. But they were murdering the Hurricanes players. And for whatever reason, the Caps, I don't know if they were tired. They couldn't get any shots. I think at one point it was 11-4 in overtime in favor of the Caps. And the Caps guy flipped the puck. What am I talking about? Out of bounds, which was up over the, oh man, I'm sounding like an idiot now. But he flipped it out, which should have been a delay of game. 2-minute warning. They didn't call it. I don't know why they didn't review it, NHL. I complain about all these other sports, but it's pretty clear that if you're behind the blue line, you throw the puck out of play, it's a delay of game. How is that not reviewable? How is there not someone in the booth whistling down in an important Game 7? Of course, when the Hurricanes guy does it in overtime too, which I think is what it was, they're right on it. They're like, oh yeah, well, we might have missed the one on the Caps, but let's give the Caps a power play. I really thought they were trying to make the Capitals win, and it didn't happen. Hurricanes move on a great goal by Stahl, I believe, in the overtime period, and then they take it to the Islanders. Up 2 games. I think they might be playing right now. I could be wrong. But you have a team that could be moving on. The only thing that makes me feel bad, Penguins got swept by that Islanders team. Oh, their game's tomorrow. I didn't think it was today. I don't know why I said that. Carolina's up 2-0 on a team that swept the Penguins. So I'm hoping that it's just a matchup thing and Carolina's hot right now and not the fact that the Penguins need a lot of help. I saw another one. Was it the Sharks and the Avs? Definitely some goalie issues and some ref issues. Just crazy that the NHL is starting to get the same scrutiny on their officiating that we're going to talk about in the NBA here in a bit and that the NFL gets. It's almost to the point where replays and cell phones at the game and 100 TV angles is not good because every play is going to be scrutinized. So I don't know where. It's not just a football thing. It's not anymore. So I don't know where they can go from this. But Matt, watching the NHL, what are your thoughts?
Just glad to see the Caps got knocked out. Was kind of bitter over what ended up happening. I saw with the Pens, there's a possibility that they could potentially be shopping Malkin. I don't know that they're going to get, they're going to obviously want a lot for Malkin, and they're not just going to give him away for nothing. But definitely, he didn't have the best year, and I think at times he was costing the Penguins with a lot of really stupid penalties. And with the games that I had watched, was very frustrated with the amount of time that I felt like he spent in the penalty box. Was not what we've typically seen. Hopefully, it was a one-year fluke, and that he comes back stronger next year. But if the right team comes with an offer, I'm not opposed to moving him, because they're definitely at a point now where you may need to start looking at shifting some of these bigger players around, because you're going to be looking at a major rebuild, and if you can cut some of those losses early, it could be something to help the Pens out.
I mean, that's kind of what the Hurricanes have done with Stahl, and they have that other guy, is it Williams, that was on the Hurricanes team back on their first and only Stanley Cup. You build around a couple guys that are vets, but then you also have a lot of young talent. But let's be honest, that Penguins line wasn't doing anything. You put all your stars in one line, and then it looks like garbage out there. I mean, watching the Caps, Ovechkin was still getting shots. They might have only got 4 off, but they were heart-stopping shots where it was like, holy cow, that game could have ended right there, even though the Hurricanes are overpowering them in this overtime. So the Penguins didn't have a lot of plays like that. They haven't had a player, or I guess a group of players, that could put themselves in a position this past year to win the big games. But like I said, hockey, a lot of underdogs have moved on. So if you're into hockey, you really don't know what's going to happen. The Columbus and Boston series is tied at 1-1. And, I mean, right now, Carolina could be in the driver's seat. It would be great for down here, so I'd love to see it. And we'll keep an eye on it. But a lot of playoff, definitely, that's a series I'll be watching. See if the Hurricanes can get it done. Let's get into the NBA now. The NBA is basically the worst officiated league in professional sports. I know a lot of bloggers like to point out the NFL's faults, but if you watched the Rockets-Warriors game, there was a play where Chris Paul just swings his leg out in like a weird, blatant attempt, falls down. This is the NBA now. Players are going to take the most wild, floppy shots. You think soccer was bad? Soccer has nothing on the NBA. It's so hard to watch. You're smiling, Matt. Go ahead.
You're hitting the nail right on the head. It wasn't just a play. It's multiple plays. And for as much as, I mean, you could call carrying on every single trip down the court. There's a lot of things that they're kind of letting way too much go. And then they realize that the game's getting away, like when the Sixers and Nets got into their fight. And then they really try to rein it back in by aggressively calling a lot of fouls. And then players end up getting fouled out, and it creates for a really awkward dynamic.
Matt, I'll be honest, the owner of the Houston Rockets, or GM, he put together a bunch of statistics, and down to the decimal points of how many points they were cost by the refs. I had to do a double check. I thought he might be a Michigan man there for a second, because that's our thing. That's our thing to put down stats on how the refs are ripping us off. Not the NBA general manager or whatever that guy is. He said that they should have won the championship last year because the refs took like 24 points away from them or something. And he was ready right there in game 1. He said James Harden was taking away 12.8 points based on fouls and 3 points or something. It's the most ridiculous thing. I don't even know where they can go from there.
Well, I mean, when you look at it, Steph Curry should have fouled out, and Steph Curry hit a huge shot at the end of that game that Absolutely. Absolutely, they swung a favor. So when they're trying to compete against the magical Golden State team, you got to catch some breaks. You got to get some guys in foul trouble to try to get into the depth of the bench and trying to make some things happen. When the refs aren't helping you, you're in a tough spot.
Yeah, and I don't even know where they can go from there. Because you already have, for as much as the NBA tries to hide it, I still have a negative feeling towards the league based on having refs bet on games and fix games. For the longest time, you can look at that one series back in like the early 2000s that was clearly fixed. I forget what teams were in it. It was like the Lakers maybe and someone else. Like when you have that in your league, and it's very easy to fix basketball games because you have a free point system that is rewarded by bad refereeing. A ref makes a bad call, your team gets 2 free shots. You do that 5 times throughout the course of the game, that's 10-point swing right there. 5 bad calls is 10 points. It's not like in the NFL, you make like a bad, or I guess even in college, like you make a bad pass interference call, that's what, 10, 15 yards? NFL is a little bit worse because it's spot of the foul. But it's not like the kicker then gets a free field goal try. That's basically what the NBA is. So you have that. In the NHL, you still have the power play. Power plays can still be killed. It's not like you get to have a guy like Dikembe Mutombo jump out of nowhere and try to block the free throw. Like there's no chance. Like it's on the guy. You call the foul, and then you just hope that player, which these guys are multimillionaires, it's just him. He's most likely going to hit that shot. Most players are like, 70 or 80% free throw shooters? That's a pretty good percentage. Like if I gave you $100 and I said there's an 80% chance that this is going to turn into $200, you most likely would take that. If I said like, oh yeah, it's a 50-50, you're probably not going to. But in the NBA, you can easily fix games because that's the percentage that you're dealing with. So I don't know how you get around it. You have Warriors, they were pushed last series. But again, these are all favorites that are moving on. I think in the East, there have been no upsets? Sixers right now, your Sixers are tied, 1-1?
Yeah. They for as bad as they looked in game 1, they definitely came out guns a-blazing game 2.
Well, I put on here the adult in the room, Jimmy Butler. We called that last week. I said he was a difference maker. I think you said the same thing. Him being on the team has elevated the Sixers to where if he can take over the games, I think he had 30 points. If he puts that together consistently, they win. They looked bad, and I thought that's what it's going to take in the game 1. That's what it's going to take for the Raptors to win. But what are your thoughts on the Sixers?
I don't know. I thought that their game plan in game 1 worked well, and I almost get a feeling with him with the way that they use Embiid, it's similar to the way that I watch the Penguins with Crosby. When Crosby's dealing with injuries, it's almost like you get 2 different Penguins teams. You get the Penguins that play with Crosby, and then they just kind of. It's almost like they watch him and just expect him to take the game over. It's like there's times where you watch the Sixers and you just think they're just forcing it to Embiid and just letting him shoot 3-pointers. And why in God's name you're enormous. Get your gigantic self back on a low post where you belong and just dunk it over everyone. That's where you need to be. Shoot those high percentage shots, get those buckets, and get going. Don't be hovering around midcourt because you're not Steph Curry. Get in there.
Hey, it was even worse whenever Garnett used to play on the Celtics. He wouldn't even shoot threes. He would be out like a foot inside. So he was taking ridiculously long shots that were all 2-pointers. Why? Take 5 steps in. What is the point of being out there?
Yeah.
So,
but I do notice with the Sixers that it seemed like they did it in the New Jersey game as well, where Embiid missed a game because of illness, and they played phenomenally because they were able to use the depth of the bench. They got a lot of guys significant minutes. And once again, last night, Embiid was going to be a game time decision, and I don't know how limited his minutes were because I didn't watch the whole game. But I mean, for a good chunk of it, they were rotating guys through. They were moving the ball well. I mean, it was really good basketball that they were playing.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. You got to play as a team at this point, and then you got to hope that carries over. I still think the Sixers got the edge. On the other game, Boston's about to go down, so that series will be tied 1-1 as it heads back to Boston. And same thing, Al Horford took over that first game. Can you have a guy take over a game like Butler did for the Sixers? Horford did. Can you have that vet take over? That's what we'll see on the East side. On the West side, it's a mess. You have the Hornets and Warriors that are already complaining about the refereeing. You have the Houston is so hard to watch because everyone flops. Everyone flops. So I don't know what to think, but Golden State kind of has their own thing too. And the NBA rule, I think that makes it worse is I saw a lot of people talk about if you shoot, they have a rule that you have to be able to come down. But that means that if you jump crazy, you can try to land wherever. So like if I wanted to, I could just shoot floaters all day.
Jump 3 feet forward.
Yeah, jump right into the guy. And that's what they're doing. I mean, you have a guy, sure, and now some people are saying, well, there were some of those where they're flailing around, but the defender's hitting him in the arm first. Well, guess what? If you can't tell as a ref because the player's so out of control, how are you expected to whistle that? Are you just supposed to guess? Like, he might have hit him in the elbow, but he was really crooked there, so I have no idea what the hell he was doing. If I was a ref, I wouldn't even blow my whistle at any of those. Because that's the only way the NBA can stop it. Don't you agree?
Yeah, have to.
They have to just quit calling fouls. They've made it such ticky-tack foul calling over the past 10 years? And every year it gets worse and worse, and now you have this. And this is the stage when people start to watch, when you start to have teams talk trash on each other, and they're going to tune in for that. It's strange. And then, I mean, even if they get past them, like I don't see the Nuggets or the other team, the Trailblazers, beating the Warriors. Like I think the Warriors just win, get to the finals, and then play a team from the East that might have a chance, might not. Could be a sweep and get 4 games again. We don't know.
I do know. If the Sixers make it, they're not sweeping them.
What do you think? In 5?
Sixers in 6.
Hey, we don't know. Because with the ref backlash, teams might start to play gun shy. You see it a lot in the NCAA tournament, where you get from your conference where it's all nice and cozy, and then you circle back around, and you can't get the same home cooking that you're used to, or it's just opened up a little bit more, and then you can't hang. So maybe that's what the NBA gets to. I don't know, but let's go ahead and get to the final bell. You got anything for us this week, Matt?
I do. There was a significant player after 19 NFL seasons, 9th all-time in field goals made, the most 50-plus field goals in NFL history, 2-time Lou Groza Award winner, and national champion Sebastian Janikowski announces his retirement. Significant to you because with him retiring, Tom Brady is now the only player left from the 2000 draft who is now still active in the league. So the big lefty Polish power hanging it up, leaving Brady as the lone survivor.
I will say, I thought Janikowski was older than that. Not going to lie. I also thought he retired about 5 years ago. So,
no, still dropping bombs.
For who? Where was he playing?
I believe he was in Seattle last year.
See, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like fantasy kickers. Normally I would see his name and it just kind of dropped off in recent years. Maybe he hasn't been playing. Maybe he was number one. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, because the people that are in our league are very rude and would purposefully raise the stock in Janikowski, knowing that I would purchase him in our league.
Of course, you homer. Maybe you could be more successful if you expanded your horizons.
How could you be more successful than the Top Gun?
I could never remember who won what year, but I guess you're right. I guess that was last year, huh? I honestly don't have anything else for the final bell. I don't think. Definitely went heavy on the NFL draft, but just excited for some football to go. Really proud of the Steelers trying to fill some holes, getting Ben Roethlisberger locked up, and we'll see what happens in the NHL and NBA playoffs. We'll be hitting those back up. And I did see from the AAF, some of the people connected to the league are starting to sue for paychecks because there were rumors going around that a couple players received medical bills in the mail from the league, where the league had initially said that they were going to cover it. And this goes back to like the Charlie Ebersol, like the first 2 weeks of the season. I guess they had them do like a physical. And if so, that guy sounds like absolute trash, because I believe that that's the guy that did the 30 for 30 on how Trump killed the USFL. And now he has his own league that is a bazillion times shittier than the USFL. It's almost like full circle. Like, what were you thinking? You make a whole thing about how you could run a football league, and then you don't even go a full season. And we talked about how a couple of the bookies had to pay out different things. Like you pay out winners based on things not happening. And you have all this merchandise that's going over. But then you have a guy that comes out, does his whole NFL thing. Or maybe it was about the XFL. I'm trying to look and see what he did. He did, this was the XFL. I don't know if he did the other one either. But basically making fun of the XFL, and then he did the AAF and bombed on it. So you can't feel sad for that guy. Like, what are you going to do? Trying to make a good league, can't get it done. But that's my final thought. Go to southboundsports.com. Been working on getting some of the website stuff improved so that we can start offering more content, and we got that coming up soon, so definitely keep an eye out there. Like I said, make sure you follow us on Instagram. We're trying to get some of our social media stuff ramped back up, and we'll be hitting that up soon, so you can find all our stuff at our website. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.